Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is my Coleman CT200U. Today, we're going to see what happens when you stick a high performance, high compression head on basically a stock Coleman CT200U. By stock, I mean the governor's still intact, the crankcase hasn't been opened, and other than these bolt-on stage 1 modifications, this is just like you get it from the factory, including the 196 head that's there. This has stock springs, stock valves, stock everything. We're going to change all that, and hopefully we're going to reap some sort of a benefit. We're looking for a little bit more torque. We're still going to be governed, all right? So we're going to hit the same RPM maybe, because we are going to be upgrading the spring pressure. Well, there's only one way to find out. We're going to get this thing outside and test it as is. This is stage 1, so we have a non-EPA carburetor, a 37 jet, open air element, a 1-inch header, and a Mini 91 silencer. That's it. Alright, this is going to be full stage 1 with the jack shaft using the stock 196 head in valve springs. We'll just send it around the yard a little bit, we'll do our modification, and we'll see if we get an improvement. Try to do a slow climb. Go around the circle a couple times. see? I'm really gonna do something about the stumps back here. Stage one made a big difference already. This thing just goes. Wasn't too bad. Got a little bit of everything. A lot of bit of everything. We get it in, do our modification, and get back out. All right, I'm going to try to keep this as straightforward as possible and make it super simple. When I do stage one, I also like to add a little bit of timing. I haven't done that yet because the only way we're going to achieve that is by pulling off the flywheel. Whether you add an offset key or you just go ahead and swap out the entire flywheel, that means you got to get the stock unit off. It's going to be a whole lot easier with the engine up on the workbench. We're going to get our 4 degrees today from a PVL flywheel. That's the first thing we're going to change. We're going to make that head look easy. To really speed things up, I'm just going to show you a few tricks along the way. If you need to learn how to install a stage 1 kit, then I advise you check out this guy right here. He's a lot smoother than me. I can be a little rough around the edges. This is pretty slick though. I got you sitting on a trash can with the 2x6, so you shouldn't go anywhere. Your carb lever, alright? You pull that son of a gun off and you have a little phallus on the end. Put that down. We'll grab our needle nose. We're going to remove the fuel line. It has this little clip on it. You can see it in a second as it comes up over. Alright, right there. Now we're going to pry the fuel line up off of the inlet. Alright, I'm pinching it with my needle nose. That way it can't leak. I'm going to grab that carb lever. I'm going to pick it up off the ground. Grab it again, and I'm going to stick that phallus right inside the fuel line. Pull my trusty clip back just in case. And voila. You're not leaking gas anywhere. You can pull the carburetor off and keep moving forward. Pair of snips. I'm going around. I'm cutting the zip ties. That way, I can release the umbilical cords. We're not trying to take the brake line off, alright? That one stays. But there might be a couple zipperoonies. There was one right around here holding it to the brake line. You're definitely going to need those ones. So snip away until it looks like everything's free. There's our kill switch. Alright. That's our throttle. That's still attached to the linkage. Next thing we're going to do is remove the entire throttle. We'll pull it through the frame and we'll leave it hanging somewhere over here for now. Take it right with the engine. Swish. Just like that. We should be good on this side of the engine. I'm going to spin things around and I'll start with removing the header on the other side. I reckon this is what one of these kits would look like if they sold used parts on the website. I try to keep everything together while I'm taking things off. Next is going to be the jack shaft. I don't think I have to remove the chain going back to the sprocket because there's a tab on the frame back here, right? And I do believe the jack shaft is bolted to it. I'm going to get the master link off of the primary and we'll get the clutch off. Then we'll have the 4 bolts that hold the engine to the jack shaft plate. If the jack shaft plate can stay where it's at, we can remove those 4 bolts, then continue on releasing the engine from the frame. Then we can pull it away from the jack shaft and leave that all in place. That's the plan anyway. This jack shaft cover makes an excellent tray for your parts. The heck does that have to do with anything? Get the clutch off, I go double dragging. I pull out 2 ratchets. This one is a 10 millimeter. That'll be working the bolt on my output shaft. I already have it loosened up. Over here on the other side, I have my ratchet. It's locked up against the foot peg, so when I turn the other side, I really don't even have to hold it. With a short extension, I believe this one was a 19 millimeter. Yeah, there it is. Bingo. Once you own the clutch, make sure you grab any spacers or shims that are there with it. That way, when you put it back together, everything lines up the same. Looks like we have 4 10 millimeter bolts to contend with next. I got my bolts off and I've deduced 2 things. One, this can definitely stay stationary. It's not going anywhere. 2, when we reinstall the engine, it's going to be best to put these bolts in first, line them up, tighten it, and then do the 4 nuts and bolts that we're about to remove, holding the block onto the engine plate itself. I'm on the other side of the vents again, and let me tell you, it is an absolute breeze to get these engine bolts off. You have a 10mm underneath that you turn, and you just have to hold the head of your bolts with a 1/2-inch wrench. No problem. Same thing in the front. Wham, bam, bla, jam. Just like that, we're up on the bench and we're ready to do work. Still have a few things that have to come off, but that's a whole lot easier than trying to mess with it down here on the mini bike. To get the gas tank off, we have 2 10mm nuts holding the studs in the front. In the back, we have an 8mm. You take your spark plug boot off and pull your throttle over. You can get between the two and loosen that 8mm bolt. And then see if we can pull it out with one hand. There it is. See, I need 2 hands. Got it. Alright. Next, I'm just going to leave the gas tank to the side like that. I'm going to remove the 4 bolts holding the fan shroud on. Those are 8mm as well. Once the fan shroud comes off, I'll be able to pull my fuel line through and then get the gas tank right out of the picture. I'll put this aside and I'll clean it before I reassemble everything. I can now get the gas tank off of there. Put that down here too. And next, we're going to remove the flywheel nut. I'm using a screwdriver to gauge where the piston is in relation to the cylinder. I'm down in there now. I'm going to feed a little bit of rope in, probably actually almost this whole thing, so about 5 feet. And then I'm going to use my impact driver to back the nut off. My rope is in. I'll turn the flywheel left a little bit since we are loosening the nut, and the piston is now compressing the rope up against the head, so it's locked in place. That's it. It's very rare that I use any power tools around my engines. Now for the fun part. I'm going to whack this flywheel off. We're using a heavy hammer, and a pry bar. I'm going to put the nut back on the shaft and come out just a little past flush. That way, when I hit, I'm not minging up the shaft or the threads. I'll hit the nut, and that should provide enough force to jerk the flywheel loose. I have a hole drilled in my workbench, and that is where the output shaft goes. I'm going to tip this thing up on its side and stick it down in so that the engine sits with the flywheel up here. I'm going to take my pry bar and stick it under the edge of my flywheel. I think that'll work. I'm going to be pulling upwards. And then I'm going to hit down on the nut. See? Flywheel's loose. Take the nut off. And now we have the flywheel. We're going to be lapping this PVL flywheel on. So that means we also have to get the woodruff key out of the situation. Well, my shaft is still in the hole on the bench. It makes it a little bit easier to come up and over and tap it out. You just want to be careful that when you're hitting downward, you don't put a hole through your oil seal. I'm going to clean that up a little bit and then get my fine lapping compound. I went ahead and removed my coil just so I could get it up and out of the way. That way it doesn't stick to the magnets when I'm lapping the flywheel. I already gave it the once around. I don't want to put too much, but I think I can use a little more. And I'm going to hit it one more time here. I'm going to clean the flywheel up and the shaft real good once I'm done. Alright, stand up here, and I'm going to put some downward pressure on it. I still have that rope in the spark plug hole, so the piston is locking the shaft from rotating. Back the other way a little bit. That should be good. We don't want any of this sitting down on top of our seal. So clean thoroughly. Down here too. The whole flywheel actually. Probably go right in a bucket of water. I got my flywheel soaking in the drink. It's just some dish soap and water. Nothing too serious. I'll use that to clean up some other parts as well. For the shaft, I'm just using carbon choke cleaner. As soon as I spray it, I get to wiping. I don't let it sit on my seal. Taking a screwdriver and putting, here I'll use a clean one, the paper towel over the end of it. Something like that. So that when I have it on its side here and I can see the keyway, I can get right in there and clean it off real good. This thing's going to be spinning around at several thousand RPM, and that fine grit will tear that rubber up quick. So, word to the wise. Do a nice job while you're here. Let that go a few more minutes. An old toothbrush makes for a really good parts cleaner, especially when you're trying to get in tight spots like your flywheel bore. I'll go back over that with some carbon choke cleaner and a clean rag. I'm also going to reinstall my woodruff key. I'll just place it in the keyway and give it a couple taps with a hammer. Now I can line up my flywheel and slide it all the way on the shaft. Grab my starter cup. It's got a little piton on it to keep it from spinning on its own. It's going to line up with this hole down here. These other two holes are threaded, and those are for a flywheel puller. So I'll put it on, see how it kind of locks in place, and then I get my nut on there. Grab my ratchet with my 19mm and I'll start applying some torque. I have my rope partially pulled out so that things can spin around. That way I could get my keyway up to the top so nothing's locked in place. I like using my crank holder tool when torquing my flywheel nut. Problem is, my tool is for a 3/4 shaft. I have a 5/8 to 3/4 adapter. This fits in the crank holder tool, but it does not fit on our 16mm output shaft. I used my Dremel with a sanding barrel, and I bored one end out a little bit. That way, it can slide on. I then took that end and placed it inside my crank holder tool. I marked the line, and now I grab my angle grinder and lop that off. Our new adapter goes on the shaft, and then the crank holder tool. Make sure that the keyways are all lined up, and then we'll bring the key into play. I'll start it on the shaft. I'm pushing it into the adapter, and now the crank holder tool itself. Give it a little tap. All right, we got it. We'll line up with a hole, and I'll add my bolt. Now I can get over there on my flywheel nut with my torque wrench, and we don't even have to worry about this side. PVL flywheel is going to be set at 54 foot-pounds. Job done. Now we can move on to the head. I'm going to start by removing this linkage. With that linkage out of the way, I'm now going to set my coil gap. I'm using one business card. For an ARC flywheel, you use 2 business cards. I'm pushing somewhat firmly on the coil so that I pinch the card in between itself and the flywheel. I'll snug those 2 bolts and then I'll tighten them. Oh yeah, that'll do. And pull this insulator off of there. I might be able to reuse this gasket where it was so fresh. Yeah, I'll get 2 hands on it so I don't tear it. Pull the vent line. And I'm going to remove this bolt and this one down here. That way I can get that piece of sheet metal off. I locked the 2 nuts together that are used to hold the billet adapter on the intake studs. We're going to be reusing these on the next head. This allows you to get a wrench on them and back them out. 4 8mm bolts gets the valve cover off. We're going to be throwing this old gasket out. We now have 4 more bolts. These ones are 12mm. I use my ratchet to crack each one of them loose, and then I get my 12mm on an extension so that I can reach down inside and back them the rest of the way out. It just works easier. It's like a screwdriver, except for a 12mm bolt. I completely removed the top 2 bolts, and my bottom ones are all the way loose. Give it a little wiggle. And pull the head off. Oop, one of the bolts fell, but here's the other one. You should have a gasket, a couple push rods, and 2 dowels. Looks like we have one of them over here on the head. Put it right there. I just used a paper towel just to wipe this outside edge of the cylinder. Make sure nothing fell down on there when we pulled the head off. I'm going to pull the piston down into the cylinder by spinning the flywheel. And grab some engine oil to lubricate the walls. I'll then let the oil go down on top of the piston. I'll bring the piston back up and I'll wipe all that excess oil with a rag. That way it doesn't fall back down in the engine. Here we go. A little oil, a little finger action. Run it around the cylinder, top of the piston, whatever you can get. Go all the way down. All right, we're there. And now, we'll start bringing it up. As it comes up, we're going to catch that oil with a rag. The reason we don't want this oil going back down in and mixing with the other honey in the pot is because we're using it to remove any contaminants we can off the piston and cylinder. Those contaminants are obviously now in that oil. I like to do this move twice. The second time around, I switch to a brand new paper towel. This thing is in really, really great shape. That cylinder looks perfect. This is awesome. Let's compare these two heads real quick. The one on the left just came off this engine. The one on the right is the one that we're putting on. Over here, we have a 20cc chamber and stock dished valves. Over here, we have a 14cc chamber, and we have those nice, flat-looking stainless steel valves. We're reducing the size of the chamber and bringing the face of the valve down a little bit. What benefit does that have if they're the same size valves? Well, the piston goes down in the cylinder and then it comes back up. At the top, you have your chamber. If we're using the same cam and the same size valves, they're going to open at the same rate, okay? And they're going to put the same amount of fuel and air on top of that piston. When we reduce the space that fuel and air goes into, then we create more pressure. More pressure gives us more bang for the buck. These both have the same piston to head clearance going on, so we're going to keep the same exact gasket. We're just going to run a freshie. This is a .010 gasket. Both heads run the same length GX200 push rods. I'm going to be replacing these stock ones with a new pair of stainless steel. I'll clean those off and then I'll put them down inside so that I'm on top of my lifters. I'll show you why in a second. This is mostly for ease of installation, but I also want to show you exactly what we're working with here. This is the head that I just removed from this engine. It has your traditional style non-Hemi rockers. If we pivot them out of the way, because by design they can do that, we look down and we can see that we have your regular run-of-the-mill slip retainers. Why are these slip retainers? Well, they just slip past that head and then hold the valve in place. If I push down, I'm actually surprised that one was so easy. Usually the intake is harder. It slides right out. The exhaust side. Pull the lash cap. And it's the same exact thing. Why is that not good? Well, these can do exactly what I just did through harmonics and vibration. When you float the valves and things are just wrong in just the right manner, those can come off. Your springs are just hanging out up here. You have no control over your push rods coming up from your lifters. And worst of all, what just happened? You dropped a valve. And that, my friends, is not a good situation. The head that we're using has champion rockers. These are shaft mounted between two posts that are connected to the head via these studs and nuts. You seeing that? No matter what you do with this design, you can't pivot the rockers side to side. So unless they break, they're not going to come off of the push rod, and they're most certainly not going to come off of these split retainers. That's right. That's an upgrade too. Instead of the slip style that you can just push down and out of the way, we have splits that have these two half-moon retainers pushing up under the head of the valve. The retainer itself is about that deep. So the spring pushes the retainer up, all right? In order to get that to release, you would have to compress the spring about that far. That's definitely not going to happen with the stock cam. This is a little bit overkill, but we're definitely not going to end up like the other guy. This has 22-pound valve springs. If we pulled the governor, this would definitely get us into the danger zone for the connecting rod. If you peek down inside, you see there's a little port work done. All I did was take down some short radiuses, and then I worked the transitions and runners a little bit. The exhaust side is hard to tell because, you know, it's a used head, but we're going to use it again. It's a good one. Here's how I install a head with champion rockers without removing the towers. I use my 10mm wrench to loosen up the adjuster nuts. I then back the adjusters way off. I'll grab the head and inspect the surface that's going on top of the gasket. I'm using the edge of my shirt to just wipe it off, just for good luck. All right, looks good. I'm going to line these channels up with the push rods. Okay, now I'm bringing my push rods up. I'm looking down through my bottom bolt holes and at the same time feeling for the dowels. When I'm on those, I'll push down gently. I'll look around the head, make sure everything's nice and square. I'm going to hold my exhaust rocker and grab my exhaust push rod with one finger. I'm going to give it a little wiggle, just so the head comes up enough that the push rod can go under the rocker. I'll hold that rocker down, and now I'm going to do the same thing on the intake side. A little wiggle wiggle. I'm under. Okay. I'm going to press down evenly and make sure that the head is square again. I'm going to take one of my bolts, just for good luck. Alright, I'm going to place that in one of the top holes. Threading it in by hand. And now I'm going to grab my extension that has my 12mm socket on the end. That way I can kiss it up. It's just a lot easier to work this like a screwdriver than it is with my sausage fingers on the edge of the bolt. That one should hold everything in place while I get everything else ready. Now we have to torque it down. So I'm going to get the other 4 bolts in place just the same. I'm not going to tighten them down yet. Just get them in there. Using my extension driver, I am bringing each one of these bolts in snug, alternating so that I bring everything down as square as possible. I just try not to do 2 bottom ones, 2 top ones, or just one at a time. Okay, now we're going to torque them, and it's going to be the same thing, a little bit on each one at a time. Never do all of one or 2 that are on the same, you know, either next to this way or this way. It's just as easy to show you. I have my torque wrench set to 18 foot-pounds. I'll start with this top bolt. I know it's at 18, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go about a quarter turn, and then I'll start moving around, doing the same quarter turn on each one of my bolts. Back to this one again. Go just a little bit tighter. And down here, same thing. Back up top. Down below. Once you start getting closer, you can just kind of work a little circle pattern. But once you get ready to really set the torque, you want to go back to that alternate. All right, I'm going to start with this top one, and I think we're going to hit the torque. Nope, not yet. Still going. All right, another important thing here. Make sure those rockers are loose. If those are tight and you go to set the torque, you could bend a push rod. You can go between 17 and 20. I'm at 18 right now. I think we're going to be okay with this setup. we're not going to be hitting crazy RPM anyway. Not with this guy still intact. I'm just using a spare push rod and my flywheel to find top dead center. I'm going to lash the valves. I'm going to set this at 0.0015. I like to hug my exhaust and just kiss the intake, meaning my exhaust is actually ever so slightly tighter. You could actually go the same with both of these, but this is going to help promote easier starts. We're already tighter than the usual 0.003, right? We're half of that. So things are going to open up and do what they have to do. But if things shut off, this is going to make it easier to start back up. The only downside to Champion rockers is your valve cover clearance. All right? We're already touching, and we're not even tight. So that's definitely not going to run right. We're going to be using a valve cover extension. This is just a piece of billet that has a threaded section on top. You could take that plug out and put a barb in if you wanted to, in case you had like a vented block or something. We don't yet, so plug it is. The way this goes is gasket, extension, another gasket, and then the valve cover. I'm going to find some bolts and I'm going to shish kebab everything and then put it on. I think that'll be a lot easier. Those ought to be long enough. That one has full thread. The other three, no, but it's not going to matter. We got that. I'm going to juggle around on these bolts, snug them up, and then I'll do the same thing when I tighten them. I'm not going to reef the heck out of them. I'm going just past snug and then some. You don't want to strip them out. We have plenty of threads and 2 gaskets to squish. With the valve cover on and tight, I think we've gone over enough. It's going to be the reverse process from here on out. I'm going to get this engine put back together and installed on the mini bike so we can take a test ride. have to turn the idle up. Let's run it. Definitely picks up better from a stop. Try this hill. Spin to the back tire. Go through the woods before it's too dark. Darn log. Line it up here. This mud is getting deep. That was butter. Even with that low idle, it doesn't seem to be stalling. Power is right there as soon as it engages. Actually spinning out a little bit. More mud. Pretty good rooster tail going that time. Come around quick now. Probably still get stuck over here. I think this is a traction problem. Oh, horsepower works. Mud bog here. That was ridiculous. I'm covered in mud. Oh well. Brakes still work. something. Try the other way. I can't believe the governor's in. That's alright, we'll just through the chain. Hey, that's what it's all about. Get back inside and reassess that situation. That was awesome. Well, it's the next morning. I hosed the mini bike off and I had removed the chain last night. I figured I'd get it back on there and, you know, maybe we could see if this was an alignment issue. Maybe even tension. I don't think we're going to have to go that far with it. This chain has definitely seen better days. It's got a few kinks in it. We could lubricate it, but that's really not a good thing. So it's about time for something new. How about a new chain, fresh bearings, some upgraded brakes, a 62 sprocket, and even a brand new riser from the Grey Goat Garage and my good friends at OMBWarehouse.com. This is going to be awesome. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.
I want you to stay.